Hello, my friends. D.L. Anderson here. Welcome back to Transformation by Truth podcast as we share the truth concerning these last days and what you must do to save yourself from the violent times that are just ahead. Today's podcast is a word of truth accounting of the end times. The end is coming. The end is near. Today's podcast is entitled End Times 630 Your Victory Over Disregard. How consideration prevents you from disregarding any facet of the Father's will. The podcast objectives are restate the key to stopping the progression of death, restate the role of complacency in your battles with disregard, reveal the best way to guard yourself from distractions, and reveal how meditation elevates your mind to a higher spiritual plane. Welcome. Now, before we begin today's lesson, I would like to welcome all my beloved brothers and sisters in Yahushua Messiah who have been scattered to the four corners of the earth, who Yahuwah has joined to this ministry for such a time as this. I would also like to welcome anyone who is engaging our podcasts or videos for the first time. We trust you were led by the set apart spirit in finding us. And if you continue to be led, we hope you stay with us, for these are troubling times and an evil day is just ahead. To this end, if you are watching this video on YouTube and you have not subscribed to our channel, click the subscribe button below and you will be alerted whenever we post new videos. Also, if you have any questions at the conclusion of this video, you can ask them using the link in the podcast description below the video player. Last but not least, if you like the video, please give it a thumbs up so YouTube can share it with believers like us. We must stop the progression of death. Shalom, my beloved brothers and sisters, and welcome to day 624 of our exposition of lawlessness. In the most recent podcast, we completed our analysis of the critical degree of knowledge, enter acceptance. That said, we are now ready to analyze our wars with ignorance and deception. And if you have been following the teaching and the training throughout this phase, then you, my friend, are ready for war. Remember, we have only ascended to the spiritual plane of knowledge, and we have analyzed its 3 degrees. But I have not shown you how to apply these degrees in spiritual battle. Therefore, the next step we must take in this exposition of lawlessness is sure. To wit, I must show you how to employ the degrees of knowledge to eliminate all the degrees of ignorance and deception, beginning with consideration. Now, to this end, you will see how and why consideration is the only force that can stop the progression of death before it gets started. My dear friends, hear me carefully as I say, you must stop the progression of death before it gets started. As I say, the primary reason why our people, past and present, have been destroyed is because they do not consider. For, as you have learned, consideration is the foundation of knowledge. Ergo, a nation who does not consider the will of Elohim will always rebel against Elohim. My dear friends, we have seen this sordid picture before. For look, listen, it has been written, hear, O heavens, and listen, O earth, for Yahuwah has spoken. I have nourished and brought up children, but they have transgressed against me. An ox knows its owner, and a donkey its master's crib. But Israel does not know. My people have not considered. Alas, a sinful nation, a people loaded with crookedness, a seed of evildoers, sons acting corruptly. They have forsaken Yahuwah. They have provoked the set apart one of Israel. They went backward. Now, I submit to you that as surely as history repeats itself, our nation is in the same state of spiritual delinquency as the former nation which Yahuwah destroyed. And like he destroyed that nation, he will destroy all who fail to consider his will. For the man who fails to consider Yahuwah's will cannot understand his will. And the man that cannot understand the will of Elohim cannot do his will. For where there is no understanding, there can be no execution. Facts. Now, these things being what they surely are, we must put the knowledge we have obtained to good use. Brothers and sisters, we must unlock the power of consideration, lest we find ourselves descending into the dying nation of Israel. For the one who fails to consider will fail to stop the progression of death. And again, we must stop the progression of death. Let's get started. A little sleep and a little slumber. Now, seeing as consideration is the fundamental degree of knowledge, it is designed to eliminate the fundamental degrees of ignorance and deception. It's the spiritual 1-for-2, where 1 degree of perfection takes care of 2 degrees of lawlessness. Now, as you have learned, disregard is the fundamental degree of ignorance, and you can see this by the table below. Along these lines, disregard is designed to reinstate despair within your mind. You learned this in End Times 533, The Impact of Ignorance and Deception, Part 3, which was posted on November 5th, 2025. That said, if you have not engaged that podcast, you must, for you will never understand the purpose of this war if you have no idea what you are fighting for. And that podcast will tell you exactly what you are fighting for. Now, as you have learned, there is much at stake in your battles with disregard, and you allow these matters to be put back on the table when you become complacent in your observance of Yahuwah's will. Here is why. Disregard can only operate in an environment where complacency is already in play. Now, the good news is you defeated the spirit of complacency in times past, but many will fail to maintain their victory. And the reason why is sure, vis-a-vis maintaining your victory over any degree of lawlessness requires a growing sense of urgency. And as many will fail to develop this progressive sense of urgency, they will lose all sense of urgency. Here lies the problem. To wit, if you lose all sense of urgency, you will forfeit the power of spiritual routine. For where there is no urgency, there can be no routine, which is crucial for your routine determines your reality. As I say, the power of your reality is a reflection of the power of your routine. Ergo, the man who has no urgency is sleeping as he travels the dangerous highways of life, and he will meet calamity and poverty. For look, listen, it has been written, yet a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and your poverty shall come like a prowler, and your need like an armed man. A perpetual train of spiritual thought. Now, if you're still with us, I am quite sure that complacency is not an issue for you. As I say, there is no way you could be complacent in your spiritual life and at the same time follow the teaching and the training the Ruach has given me to share. Ergo, your greatest threat is not complacency. Quite the contrary, your greatest threat is the vast array of distractions the enemy has in his arsenal. Here is why. Distractions are a backdoor to complacency, for distractions are designed to cause you to disregard the more critical aspects of Yahuwah's will. Ergo, the man or woman who is persistently distracted will eventually become complacent. And seeing as they are already infected with the spirit of disregard, they will set off the progression of death. Now, that said, the question of the hour is quite simply this: how can you guard yourself from distractions so that you are not disregarding Yahuwah's will without knowing that you are disregarding Yahuwah's will? My dear friends, the answer is as obvious as it is sure. Vis-a-vis, you must always consider Yahuwah's will. To wit, his will must be on your mind every hour of every day so that it is reflected in all your thoughts. Now, even though this is a simple matter to understand in concept, it is very difficult to implement in procedure due to the constant wave of distractions the enemy is directing towards our minds. And yet, there is a path to victory, and it is the same path you must follow to stop the progression of death. To wit, you, my friend, must unlock the power of consideration. Here is why. Consideration has the power to unlock a perpetual train of spiritual thought that makes it impossible for you to be distracted. Now, seeing as this is the only way you can stop the progression of death, it should be clear that this is one of the most critical intervals in your quest. And so we must take a closer look at this interval to ensure that we find success. Let's make it happen. The first step to elevating your mind to a higher spiritual plane. Now, to begin with, we must solve the following mystery. Vis-a-vis, how do you initiate a perpetual train of spiritual thought such that you are at all times locked in as you consider every line and precept of Yahuwah's will? The answer is sure. And we should start by analyzing the end goal, after which I will show you how to achieve it. That said, here is the end goal. Consideration is designed to create an environment within your mind where Yahuwah's will is the baseline of your thought processes. Now, this is crucial for as a man thinks, so is he. Ergo, the man who constantly considers the will of Elohim will eventually master his will. As I say, if you continue on any path long enough, you will eventually reach the end. Obvious facts. Notwithstanding, the constant consideration of Yahuwah's will is not a default function of the mind. Remember, your mind is constantly processing multiple incongruent sets of stimuli, which makes constant consideration on this wise an impossible feat. However, this speaks to the default makeup of your mind. Remember, consideration has the power to elevate your thought processes to a higher spiritual plane. It does this by unlocking the power of meditation, which you learned in End Times 621, an intro to consideration. Now, what you didn't learn in that podcast is sure, vis-a-vis, we did not discuss the detailed procedure of meditation. This is crucial for this procedure is the key to unlocking a perpetual train of spiritual thought to guard yourself from persistent distractions. That said, it is imperative that we reconsider a definition for meditation, for in it lies the key. Once more, please. By definition, to meditate is to give painful attention, to be earnest in, due to concern and or interest, to devise, to contrive, to revolve in the mind, to practice. Now, by considering the high points of this definition, we will come to see how the power of meditation unlocks a perpetual train of spiritual thought that makes it impossible for you to be distracted. Let's get going. Now, first and foremost, to meditate is to give painful attention to. This begs two questions. What are you giving painful attention to and why? Now, I will answer these questions with the following revelation. Get this. You are giving painful attention to Yahuwah's will because the enemy is distracting you day and night from giving painful attention to Yahuwah's will. My dear friends, it's the classic sink or swim, do or die scenario. To wit, if you fail to give painful attention to Yahuwah's will, then you will be persistently distracted and you will fall into endless death. On the other hand, if you succeed in giving painful attention to Yahuwah's will, you will not be distracted and you will inherit everlasting life. And there is no in between. These are the only two paths you can follow in this life. That is the way of it. Now, that said, the question we should chiefly entertain is this. How can you give painful attention to Yahuwah's will on a consistent basis? The answer is sure, and it requires you to understand and to utilize the default makeup of your mind. Now, if you recall, your thought generation process is inherently involuntary. To wit, your mind is designed to generate thoughts based upon the constant procession of stimuli. As I say, the procession of stimuli starts once, and there is nothing you can do to stop this process. However, there is something you can do to enhance this process. Remember, your mind is so efficient that it can prioritize the procession of stimuli by establishing priority based upon evolving criteria. All you need is a baseline for the evolving criteria. Enter Yahuwah's will. To wit, the adamant, i.e., the plumb line. Here is why this is so crucial. By establishing Yahuwah's will as the baseline for all stimuli, the output of your thought processes will no longer be undeveloped. Quite the contrary. And for the first time, your thought processes will transfer developed thoughts into your CPU for processing. Now, if you have been following the teaching, then you know that this is the most profound miracle we have analyzed thus far in this exposition on lawlessness. For this is the first step to elevating your mind to a spiritual plane where you consistently receive knowledge and the will of Elohim. Not only this, but it is also the key to your victory over disregard. And it is the foundation for your victory over misconceptions. And seeing as we are out of time for today, we will continue analyzing these matters in the next podcast. To wit, I will prove how establishing Yahuwah's will as the baseline for all stimuli will ensure that A, you never disregard his will, and B, you never have misconceptions concerning his will. So stay locked in, and I'll see you in 2 days. Yahuwah bless you until then. Now, here is the final word. The path before us may be hard, but it can get worse if you disregard. Brothers and sisters, hear me carefully as I say, this is the message for the hour. Yes, the path into everlasting life is straight and narrow and hard pressed, but the paths of unrighteousness all end with endless death. Not only this, but the assemblies of the unrighteous are cesspools of every foul spirit known to man, and everyone is worse off than they are thinking. For whilst they travel life's solemn main, they take no heed of all the warnings, and they disregard how they are all sinking. Heretofore, I recommend don't complain about the path that leads to everlasting life, for there are but few who will ever find it. And always remember the epic of mind over matter, for if it matters, then we don't mind it. Praise Yah. Now, here is today's assignment. Meditate on today's lesson. And if you have any questions, please submit them using the form at pinnacleofholiness.com. And I will respond to you as soon as I can. Now, here is what's next. We completed today's podcast, End Times 6:30, Your Victory Over Disregard. And the next podcast is entitled End Times 6:32, Your Victory Over Misconceptions. I will post this podcast on Wednesday, March 18th, 2026. Until then, my friends, continue to be led by the Spirit of Elohim. Continue to watch, Continue to pray, continue in fasting, and most of all, continue to be focused, for the end is coming. The end is near.